On my birthday, my parents gave my gift to my sister and said, "You don't deserve anything." I stayed silent. That night, I packed my bags without a word. Weeks later, as they sang happy birthday to her again, their phones lit up with 37 missed calls and a message they never expected. I, 32M, stood in the doorway of my childhood home, watching my parents sing happy birthday to my sister for the second time in 3 weeks. The cake had 37 candles this time, one for each missed call they'd ignored from me over the past month. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 weeks earlier, I'd driven 6 hours to surprise them on my birthday. I hadn't been home in 2 years because work kept me busy, but I'd finally carved out time. When I walked through that door with grocery bags full of ingredients for my favorite meal, I found my sister already there, lounging on the couch like she owned the place. She'd moved back in 8 months ago after her third failed business venture, and from what I could tell, she had no plans to leave. Mom hugged me briefly before returning to whatever she was cooking. Dad gave me a nod from his recliner. My sister didn't even look up from her phone. I set the groceries down and mentioned that I'd brought everything to make the dinner we used to have every year on my birthday. Mom waved her hand dismissively and said they'd already eaten. It was 4 in the afternoon. I sat down anyway, thinking we'd at least spend some time together. That's when I noticed the wrapped box on the coffee table, the same silver paper Mom had used for my gifts since I was a kid. My chest tightened with something that felt like hope. Maybe they'd remembered after all. My sister reached for it without asking, tearing through the paper while I sat frozen. Inside was the vintage watch I'd been talking about for years, the exact model, the exact specifications. I'd sent Mom the link 6 months ago, had mentioned it again in my last 3 phone calls. The price tag was still attached, $2,000. My sister fastened it around her wrist immediately, holding it up to the light. She said it was beautiful, that Mom and Dad always knew exactly what she wanted. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to correct her, to tell her it was meant for me. Instead, Dad told me I didn't deserve anything, that I'd abandoned them by moving away for work, that I never called enough or visited enough, while my sister was there every day. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, feeling something inside me calcify into stone. Then I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out. Nobody followed me. Nobody called after me. I drove back to my apartment in silence. 6 hours of darkness and empty highway, and I made a decision. The next morning, I started packing. Not just a suitcase, everything. I'd been offered a position in Singapore 3 months earlier and had turned it down because I didn't want to be so far from family. I called them back that Monday morning. The job was still available. I accepted immediately. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my sister. I worked my notice period, sold my furniture, closed my accounts, and tied up every loose end in my life. When people asked why Singapore, I told them it was for career advancement. That was true enough. 2 weeks into my new job, the calls started. First from Mom, then Dad, then my sister. I watched each one come through and sent them all to voicemail. They didn't leave messages at first, just called and called, sometimes back to back, sometimes in the middle of my night. I'd wake up to 15 missed calls and go back to sleep. On the 37th call, Mom finally left a voicemail. She said my sister's latest business idea needed funding, and they'd told her to ask me since I was always so responsible with money. She said family helped family, and it was time I stepped up. She mentioned nothing about my birthday, nothing about the watch, nothing that suggested she understood why I might not be answering. I deleted it and went to work. The messages got more frequent after that. Dad left one saying I was being childish and needed to grow up. My sister sent texts saying I was selfish for not helping her when I clearly had money to spare. She'd apparently told them about the salary increase I'd mentioned during my last visit home, before my birthday, before everything. I blocked their numbers and changed my phone. I informed my company's HR department that I was not to be contacted through work regarding family matters. I updated every emergency contact form, every piece of documentation. I built a wall so complete that even if they tried, they couldn't reach me. But I wasn't done. 3 weeks after I'd left the country, my sister had another birthday. She was posting about it constantly on social media, the only connection I'd left unblocked because I wanted to see this. She'd planned a big party at my parents' house, invited all her friends, made a whole spectacle of it. The photos showed the dining room decorated exactly like Mom used to decorate for my birthdays when I was young. The irony wasn't lost on me. I waited until the party was in full swing. I could see from her Instagram stories that the cake had been brought out, candles lit, everyone gathered around. That's when I initiated my plan. I'd spent the past 3 weeks working with a lawyer back home. Not just any lawyer, one who specialized in estate planning and family trusts. See, what my parents had forgotten, or maybe never bothered to tell my sister, was that our grandmother had left everything to me. The house they lived in, the one my sister was currently celebrating in, wasn't my parents' house. It was mine. Grandmother had put it in a trust with me as the sole beneficiary, executable when I turned 30. I'd turned 32 years ago. I'd never said anything because I didn't care. I made good money and they needed somewhere to live. I'd planned to sign it over to them eventually, maybe keep it in the family for their retirement. But that was before they gave away something meant for me without a second thought. Before Dad said I didn't deserve anything. Before they chose her over me so completely that they couldn't even pretend otherwise. The lawyer had been working with a property management company. The eviction notice was legal, properly filed, and absolutely enforceable. They had 60 days. As my sister blew out her candles, 3 phones in that dining room lit up simultaneously. The property management company had sent the formal notice via email, text, and certified mail. The subject line was simple: notice to vacate, property transfer to legal owner. I watched through her Instagram story as confusion spread through the room. My sister's face went from joy to bewilderment. Someone must have read the message aloud because suddenly everyone was looking at their phones, and the festive atmosphere curdled into chaos. The call started immediately. First my sister, then both parents, numbers I didn't recognize, probably borrowed phones from party guests. 37 missed calls in the first hour alone. I'd chosen that number deliberately. The voicemails were different this time. Panic edged with anger. Mom said there must be some mistake, that grandmother wouldn't have done that I needed to call them right away. Dad said I was being vindictive and cruel. My sister screamed into her message that I was ruining her birthday, that I was a horrible brother, that I'd always been jealous of her. None of them said they were sorry. None of them mentioned my birthday or the watch or the words that had sent me walking out that door. I saved every voicemail and went to bed. It was morning in Singapore, and I had work to do. Update 1. The messages evolved over the next week. The anger faded into bargaining. Mom called from a neighbor's phone saying they could talk about this. That family didn't do things like this to each other. The irony of her using that particular phrase wasn't lost on me. Dad left a message saying I was being irrational, that one argument shouldn't destroy decades of family. My sister sent a long text from a friend's phone about how she'd always looked up to me, how I was her hero, how she couldn't believe I'd do this to her. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I sent a single message to the family group chat I'd been ignoring. I wrote that the property transfer was final and legal, that they had 60 days as stipulated in the notice, and that I'd hired the property management company to handle all communications going forward. I told them not to contact me directly anymore, that any further messages would be considered harassment. Then I left the group chat and blocked those numbers too. My sister posted a long story on social media about family betrayal and ungrateful siblings. She didn't mention the watch or my birthday or any of the context, just that her cruel brother was evicting their elderly parents for no reason. The post got a lot of sympathy from people who didn't know the full story. I didn't care. The people who mattered, my actual friends, my colleagues, the family members who'd always treated me fairly, knew enough. My aunt, Mom's sister, called me. She was the only one whose calls I answered. She asked me what happened, and I told her everything. The watch, the birthday, the words Dad had used, the years of being second choice to my sister's endless drama and failures. She listened quietly and then said she wasn't surprised. She mentioned that my grandmother had explicitly written me into the trust because she'd seen how my parents favored my sister, how they enabled her instead of helping her grow. Grandmother had told my aunt she wanted to make sure I had something that couldn't be taken and given away. That conversation lasted 2 hours. When it ended, my aunt said she supported my decision and that sometimes the healthiest thing you could do was walk away from people who didn't value you. She said my grandmother would be proud that I'd finally stood up for myself. I cried after we hung up, the first time I'd cried since leaving. The property management company informed me that my parents had contacted 3 different lawyers trying to fight the eviction. All 3 told them the same thing. The trust was ironclad. I was the legal owner, and they had no grounds to contest it. My parents had been living in my house for 2 years without ever knowing it wasn't theirs. The monthly payments they thought were going to a mortgage had actually been going into a maintenance account I'd set up to handle property taxes and repairs. With 40 days left on their notice, reality seemed to set in. Dad called the property management company and asked about buying the house. They relayed the message to me. The asking price would be market value, $450,000. Dad made $60,000 a year. Mom didn't work. My sister certainly had no money. There was no way they could buy it. I instructed the property management company to begin preparing the house for sale to external buyers after the 60-day period ended. I wanted it gone. I didn't want to be a landlord, didn't want any ongoing connection to that place. Whatever equity came from the sale would go into my retirement accounts and investments. I was 32. I had time to build something entirely new. Update 2. At day 45, my sister showed up at my old workplace. She'd apparently forgotten I'd changed jobs, or maybe she thought someone there could contact me. Security had her removed after she caused a scene in the lobby. My former colleagues messaged me about it, asking if I was okay. I assured them I was and thanked them for not giving her any information. She posted about that too. Another long social media rant about how I'd abandoned my family, how I was hiding from my responsibilities, how I was letting our parents become homeless. The post included old photos of us as kids, carefully curated to show happy family moments. What it didn't show was the pattern that had defined our entire lives. Her making mistakes, them fixing it, me being forgotten in the process. What she also didn't know was that I'd compiled everything. Every text message where they'd asked me for money to bail her out. Every voicemail about her latest crisis. Every instance where my achievements had been downplayed because they coincided with her failures and they didn't want to make her feel bad. I had years of documentation showing exactly what kind of family dynamic I'd been living in. I didn't post it publicly. I didn't need to. But I sent it to extended family members who'd been hearing my sister's version of events. I sent it to my aunt, to my grandmother's brother, to the cousins who'd been asking what really happened. I let the truth speak for itself. The responses were overwhelming. Most had suspected something wasn't right about my parents' version of things. Several admitted they'd noticed the favoritism for years, but hadn't wanted to interfere. A few shared their own stories about times they'd been treated as secondary by my parents, moments when my sister's wants had trumped others' needs at family gatherings. My uncle, Dad's brother, called me directly. He apologized for not saying something sooner, for not standing up for me when he'd seen how things were. He said that when my grandmother had set up the trust, she'd told him exactly why she was doing it. She'd made him the backup executor in case something happened to the original lawyer. He offered to help with anything I needed regarding the property transfer. I thanked him and said the property management company had it handled, but I appreciated his support. With 2 weeks left, my parents finally found somewhere to go. Dad's cousin had a rental property an hour away, smaller, older, in a worse school district, not that it mattered anymore. My sister would have to find her own place. The cousin wasn't willing to take her in too. Apparently she'd burned that bridge years ago with unpaid borrowed money. The day before the eviction date, Mom sent one final message through my uncle. She said they'd packed everything and would be out on time. She said she hoped I was happy, that I'd gotten what I wanted. She said they'd raised me better than this and were disappointed in who I'd become. I had my uncle relay my response. I told them I'd learned everything from watching them. How to prioritize one child over another, how to dismiss someone's feelings, how to take what wasn't theirs and give it to someone they loved more. I said I hoped the watch was worth it. The house was emptied on schedule. The property management company did a walkthrough and reported minimal damage, just normal wear and tear. They listed it immediately. I'd priced it to sell fast. I wanted it gone. It sold in 8 days. A young couple with a baby, buying their first home. The property management company sent me photos of them at the closing, smiling and excited. That house would be filled with better memories now. That felt right. Update 3. 6 months passed. I'd settled into life in Singapore completely. Work was challenging and rewarding. I'd made friends, started dating someone, learned to cook local dishes. I video called my aunt every Sunday and my uncle twice a month. They kept me updated on extended family news. They never mentioned my parents or sister unless I asked, which I didn't. Then my sister found me. Not physically, she didn't have that kind of money, but she somehow got my new email address. The message was long and rambling. She said she was sorry, that she'd been selfish, that she hadn't realized how much they'd hurt me. She said she understood now why I'd left. She told me our parents had been struggling financially, that Dad had taken early retirement because of stress, that Mom was working part-time at a grocery store. She said she'd moved into a studio apartment and was working 2 jobs. She said it was hard, but she was finally learning to stand on her own. She said she'd sold the watch, had to, needed money for rent, and that she thought about me every time she looked at her bare wrist. I read it twice and then didn't respond. A week later, another email arrived. This one was shorter. She asked if I could ever forgive them. She said she didn't expect money or help, just wanted to know if there was a chance we could someday be family again. I thought about it for a long time. I talked to my aunt. I talked to my therapist. I'd started seeing one shortly after moving, working through decades of being the forgotten child. I talked to the person I was dating, who listened without judgment and then asked me what I wanted, not what I thought I should want. What I wanted was peace. And peace, I'd learned, didn't require reconciliation. It didn't require forgiveness. It required boundaries and distance and the understanding that some relationships were better left in the past. I wrote one email back. I told my sister that I appreciated her apology, but I wasn't interested in rebuilding what we'd had. I explained that family wasn't just biology. It was respect and consideration and showing up for people consistently, not just when it was convenient. I said that they'd shown me repeatedly that I wasn't a priority, and I'd finally accepted that truth and built a life accordingly. I told her I wished her well with her new independence, that I hoped she'd learn and grow from having to support herself. I said that maybe this separation was good for all of us. Then I blocked the email address and set up filters to catch any new ones she might create. My 33rd birthday came around. I celebrated with friends in Singapore, people who'd known me less than a year, but who'd somehow made me feel more valued than my family had in decades. We went to a rooftop bar overlooking the city. Someone gave me a book I'd mentioned wanting. Someone else brought a cake with a joke from an inside reference only our friend group would understand. Nobody forgot. Nobody gave my gift to someone else. Nobody said I didn't deserve anything. At midnight, I looked at my phone out of habit. No missed calls. No messages. My family had finally learned to leave me alone. That absence felt less like loss and more like relief. I'd paid an enormous price for peace. The entire family I'd grown up with, gone in a single calculated move. Some people might say I overreacted, that I was too harsh, that I should have tried to work it out. Those people had never spent 32 years being second choice. They'd never had their birthday forgotten while watching their siblings celebrated twice. They'd never been told they didn't deserve anything by the people who were supposed to love them most. I had no regrets. The house sold for enough that after all expenses, I'd netted $320,000. That money was invested in growing. But more valuable than the money was what I'd gained by walking away. Self-respect, clear boundaries, and the understanding that I deserved better than what they'd been willing to give me. A year after that birthday, after that watch, after those words, I was half a world away building something they'd never touched. I had a life they knew nothing about, friends they'd never meet, achievements they'd never minimize. I'd taken the only thing they'd wanted and turned it into my freedom. That night of 37 missed calls had been a message, all right, but not the one they'd expected. They'd learned that actions had consequences, that you couldn't mistreat someone indefinitely and expect them to keep absorbing it. That love without respect was worthless, and family meant nothing if it was built on inequality and dismissal. I was done being the forgotten son. I'd become someone entirely new, someone who knew his worth and wouldn't accept less than he deserved. And I was finally, completely free. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.